My HOA built a luxury resort on my land. They tore up the garden I planted for my late wife and called the cops on me for trespassing when I tried to stop them. The HOA president, a smug woman named Karen, held up some phony paperwork and told me my property was now common ground. She actually smirked as they bulldozed my wife's memorial tree. They thought an old veteran like me would just give up. But what they didn't know was that my father left me a secret weapon tucked away in his old files. A document so powerful, it wouldn't just get my land back. It would make me the legal owner of their entire $1 million resort. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because you're about to see a masterclass in revenge. And if you believe that no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit subscribe. You're not going to want to miss the moment they are forced to hand me the keys. The drive back from the VA always left me feeling wrung out. Not the good kind of tired, like after a day of splitting wood, but the thin, papery exhaustion that comes from sitting in beige rooms under fluorescent lights, answering the same questions you answered 6 months ago. The best part of the trip was turning onto my long gravel driveway, letting the familiar crunch of the stones under my tires wash the hospital smell out of my head. For 20 years, this place had been my sanctuary. 24 acres of quiet woods my father had bought after the war, a small house my wife Sarah and I had made a home, and a promise I'd made to her before she passed. I'd keep it peaceful. I'd finish the workshop. I'd make sure the dogwood tree we planted for our anniversary always had enough water. That day, the peace was gone. I felt it before I saw it. A low, grinding vibration in the steering wheel. It wasn't thunder. It was the growl of a diesel engine where no engine should be. I parked the truck and walked around the back of the house, and then I saw it. A bright yellow bulldozer was carving a massive scar into my back acreage, my land. It was methodically tearing up the earth, pushing mounds of rich, dark soil aside like it was garbage. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'm a retired contractor. I know what a work site looks like. And this one was planted squarely where my property line had been for 60 years. A young guy in a hard hat was leaning against a pickup truck, looking at a set of plans. I walked toward him, my boots sinking into the freshly turned dirt. The air smelled of mud and exhaust. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as I could. He looked up, not with alarm, but with a kind of weary annoyance. "New clubhouse. Old-timer. Got a problem? Take it up with the HOA." He gestured with his thumb back toward the neighborhood that had sprung up behind my property a decade ago. The Homeowners Association. I'd never had much to do with them. I wasn't a member. My land was never part of their development. I told him as much. "This isn't HOA land. This is my property. You're trespassing." He just shrugged and pulled out his phone. "Look, I just drive the machine. You gotta talk to the president. She's on her way." 10 minutes later, a pristine white SUV pulled up. A woman in her 40s, dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a crisp polo shirt with an embroidered HWL logo, stepped out. She held a clipboard like a weapon. This, I would soon learn, was Karen Whitmore. She walked toward me with a smile that was all teeth. "Mr. Tiller, is it? I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Harrison Woods Landing HOA. I understand there's some confusion about our new community improvement project." The way she said confusion made it sound like a mental defect on my part. "There's no confusion," I said, pointing to an old iron stake barely visible in the weeds. "That's my property marker. Your bulldozer is 100 yards onto my land." She glanced at the stake and gave a little condescending chuckle. "Oh, I'm afraid those old markers are obsolete. According to the updated survey records filed with the county, this parcel was redesignated as common use property. We're building a members-only resort clubhouse, pool, cabanas. It's going to be wonderful for property values." My blood ran cold. I couldn't form the words. She was talking about my land like it was a vacant lot she'd found on a map. I looked past her, at the path of destruction the bulldozer had carved. It was heading directly for the small clearing where Sarah's memorial tree stood, the dogwood. We'd planted it on our 25th anniversary. After she was gone, it was the one place that still felt like it was hers. "You can't," I stammered, pointing. "That tree? You can't touch that tree." For a split second, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. She understood. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of performative sympathy. "I'm very sorry for whatever personal attachment you may have, but this is a community project approved by the board. We can't let sentiment stand in the way of progress." I knew I wouldn't win an argument out here in a field of mud. I was a man who believed in documents, in proof, in black and white lines on paper. This had to be a mistake. A massive, terrible mistake. I went back inside, my hands shaking with a rage I hadn't felt since I was a young man in a foreign country. I pulled out the heavy file box from the hall closet. Inside was the original deed, signed by my father. The official county plat map from his purchase, showing the exact boundaries. I even had the hand-drawn survey his friend had made, with notes scribbled in the margins. I spent the next hour making copies, my mind racing. They couldn't just take a man's land. This wasn't some banana republic. I drafted a letter to the HOA board, formally requesting an emergency meeting to correct their error, and attached copies of every document I had. I sent it by certified mail that same afternoon, feeling a small knot of hope. The truth was on my side. The law was on my side. For 3 days, the only reply was the constant roar of machinery from my backyard. The noise started at 7 in the morning and didn't stop until dusk. I watched from my kitchen window as they poured concrete footings over the patch of land I'd cleared for Sarah's garden. I couldn't bring myself to walk back there. I didn't want to see the tree. On the 4th day, a thick envelope arrived. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm downtown, one of those places with a name made of 3 other names. My hope evaporated as I tore it open. It was a cease and desist letter. It accused me of trespassing on designated HOA common land. It claimed I was harassing their contractors and interfering with a sanctioned community development. They weren't just ignoring my proof. They were twisting the story to make me the villain. They were doubling down. I stood there in my hallway, the crisp legal paper rattling in my hand, and looked out the back window. The view was different now. The light came through the trees in a way it never had before. It took me a second to realize why. Where the delicate branches of the dogwood had been, there was just an empty patch of sky. They'd already cut it down. And in that sickening moment, I knew this wasn't about a survey error or a clerical mistake. This was theft. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The letter felt like a declaration of war. My wife's tree was gone, reduced to a pile of wood chips and sawdust. My garden was a slab of rebar-studded concrete. And according to some lawyer I'd never met, I was the one in the wrong. The rage I felt was cold and sharp. This wasn't about a simple property dispute anymore. They had crossed a line, turning a mistake into a malicious attack. But I was a CB. We don't just get mad, we get to work. I put the letter down, made myself a cup of coffee that was thick enough to stand a spoon in, and started making a plan. My first stop had to be the source, the county records office. Lawyers and HOA presidents could lie, but the official plat maps filed with the government couldn't. I gathered my original deed and the certified survey from 1958 and drove downtown, feeling the righteous anger of a man who knows he has the facts on his side. The records office was a tomb of beige filing cabinets and flickering overhead lights, smelling of old paper and dust. I waited in line behind a young couple arguing about a permit for a deck, and finally got to a clerk who looked like she'd been worn down by decades of public service. I laid my documents out on the counter. "I need to report an illegal land seizure," I said, my voice steady. "A developer is building on my property, and they're claiming a new survey gives them the right." She took my papers without a word, typed my parcel number into her computer with 2 fingers, and squinted at the screen. She clicked the mouse a few times. A low hum came from the tower under her desk. "Well," she said, her voice flat. "According to this, the HOA at Harrison Woods Landing filed for a boundary adjustment 2 years ago on the adjacent parcel." She turned the monitor toward me. On the screen was a digital map. A thick red line had been drawn, slicing off my back 10 acres and absorbing them into the HOA's common area. "That's impossible," I said, my heart starting to pound. "They can't just draw a new line. I'm the owner. I was never notified." She shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about her lack of investment in my problem. "Says here the notice was returned as undeliverable. The filing claims the parcel was surveyed and found to be abandoned land. Looks like they claimed a clerical error in the county records showed no active title holder for that section, so they annexed it. Bureaucratic gaslighting, that's what it was. A neat and tidy way to steal my land using forms and rubber stamps. I felt like I was in a nightmare. My family had paid taxes on that land for 60 years. I had the receipts to prove it. But in the eyes of this computer, I didn't exist. I was a ghost. Defeated, I drove home through the neighborhood. The signs on the manicured lawns read, "Welcome to Harrison Woods Landing and future home of the Summit Club." People were excited. I saw a couple I recognized, the Millers, out walking their dog. I'd helped Jim Miller fix his lawnmower last summer. He saw my truck, gave a weak, hesitant wave, and then quickly looked away, pulling his wife in the other direction. The message was clear. I was no longer a neighbor. I was an obstacle. Later that week, I ran into another neighbor at the hardware store. "Jack," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Listen, a lot of us are sorry about how this is playing out. But that new resort, it's going to add 50 grand to our home values. You understand, right?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him until he finally shuffled away. The whispers started after that. I'd hear them when I went to get my mail. "He's slipping. He's confused. Poor old guy thinks it's still his land." They weren't just taking my property. They were trying to take my sanity too, painting me as a doddering old fool who couldn't read a map. That's when I took the folding chair out of my garage. It was an old aluminum one, the kind you take to a fireworks show. I set it up just inside my now violated property line, about 50 feet from the bustling construction site. And Saturday, from sunrise to sunset, I watched them. I watched the trucks pour more concrete. I watched them frame the walls of a building that stood where my wife's memories used to grow. The crew tried to ignore me at first. Then they started getting uncomfortable. The foreman would glance over, then look away. They could feel my eyes on them. It wasn't an act of protest. It was a vigil. I wasn't trying to convince them of anything anymore. They couldn't be convinced. They didn't want to be. I sat there for a full week, the anger and the grief churning inside me until it burned itself out, leaving something cold and hard in its place. I had been trying to fix this the way you'd fix a leaky faucet. Go to the source, follow the instructions, use the right tools. But I finally understood they hadn't made a mistake. They had played a different game, using rules I didn't know existed. It was time I stopped playing their game and started playing my own. That evening, I didn't sit outside. I went straight back to the old file box, not for the deed or the survey maps. I'd shown those to anyone who would listen, and it had done nothing. I started digging deeper, past the tax records and the mortgage papers. My father had been a meticulous man. He kept everything. Tucked in a manila envelope at the very bottom of the box was a document I hadn't looked at in 30 years. It was thicker than the others, bound with an old brass brad. The paper was brittle, the typewritten words faded. The heading read, "Mineral Rights, Title and Surface Estate Agreement." My dad had been a geologist before he joined the service. He always told me, "Son, what's on top of the land is only half the story." I scanned the dense legal language, and one phrase jumped out. Surface rights in perpetuity. The HOA thought they had claimed abandoned land. They'd filed for a new title. But they had forgotten to check for a second one, a much older and more powerful one, that lay dormant beneath their feet. A slow smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. I picked up the phone. It was time to stop making requests and start making calls. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The old document felt different in my hands now. It wasn't just a piece of family history. It was a weapon. The next morning, I made an appointment with a man whose name I'd gotten from an old colleague in the construction business. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a title specialist, a quiet, older gentleman who worked out of a small, cluttered office above a bakery. He spent nearly 2 hours poring over my father's mineral rights title and cross-referencing it with the HOA's land seizure filing on his computer. He didn't say much, just, and I see. Finally, he leaned back in his squeaky chair, took off his reading glasses, and looked at me. "Mr. Tiller," he said, his voice calm and even. "They built a house of cards on your foundation." He explained it in simple terms I could understand. When the land was originally sectioned off after the war, the surface rights, the right to build, farm, and live on the land, were sold separately from the mineral rights, the rights to whatever was underneath. My father, being a geologist, had bought both. The HOA, in their haste and arrogance, had only looked at the surface title. They found what they thought was a loophole and pounced. But they never checked for the mineral title, which, in my case, included a clause giving it seniority and control over the surface in perpetuity. "It's like they bought a car," the specialist said, "but you hold the title to the engine. They can't drive it anywhere without your permission." I paid him in cash for his time and walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. For the first time in months, I wasn't a victim. I was the man with the keys. My next step was to build a team. I used a chunk of my savings, the money Sarah and I had put away for a trip to Alaska we never got to take, to hire a land use attorney. Not one of the slick billboard lawyers, but a quiet, sharp-eyed man named David Chen, who specialized in difficult property cases. When I laid out the situation, he didn't promise a quick victory. He just nodded slowly and said, "Their oversight is significant." That was all I needed to hear. Then, I called in a favor. I called Mike Grantham, a geotech engineer I'd worked with in the Navy. We called him Grinder because he could find the structural weaknesses in anything, from a bridge to a battleship's hull. I'd once helped him rebuild the engine in his son's first car, and he'd told me if I ever needed anything, all I had to do was ask. I asked him to take a look at the resort's construction, quietly. The final piece of the puzzle was to create a shield. On my lawyer's advice, I formed a private limited liability company. A simple, anonymous name, Dogwood Properties LLC. It cost a few $100s. This LLC was now the official owner of my mineral and surface rights. Jack Tiller, the confused old veteran, was disappearing. In his place was a faceless corporate entity, and corporations don't get emotional. They enforce contracts. Our first move was a test, a piece of bait. My lawyer, on behalf of Dogwood Properties, sent a certified letter to the HOA. It was polite, almost friendly. It stated that while they had inadvertently built on land to which we held superior title, we were willing to be good neighbors. We offered to lease them the surface rights for a nominal fee, $100 a year. It was a ridiculously low offer, a chance for them to save face and avoid a legal catastrophe. I knew Karen Whitmore wouldn't take it. Her ego wouldn't allow it. A week went by. Then 2. No response. David Chen confirmed they had received and signed for the letter. They were ignoring us, just as I predicted. That's when we moved from defense to offense. David had done some digging into the HOA's corporate structure, and he found something beautiful. The small, standalone building they used as their office, the one on the edge of the development where Karen held her little court, wasn't owned by the HOA. It sat on a small commercial parcel owned by an out-of-state real estate investor. And thanks to a tip from Grinder, who had a cousin working in commercial finance, we learned that investor was 3 months behind on his payments and was desperate to unload the property before the bank foreclosed. Through Dogwood Properties LLC, we made him a quiet, all-cash offer. It was $5,000 less than he was asking, but it was fast and clean. No inspections, no contingencies. Just a wire transfer. He took the deal in less than an hour. A week later, the deed was recorded. The Harrison Woods Landing Homeowners Association was now a tenant on my property. They had no idea. They were so busy building their illegal resort on my back acreage that they never thought to protect their own front door. They had called me a trespasser. Now, every time Karen Whitmore walked into her office to plot her next move against me, she was the one who was trespassing. That night, the house was silent. The noise from the construction site had finally stopped for the day. I walked into the bedroom and picked up the silver-framed photo of Sarah from the nightstand. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners. It was taken the day we planted her dogwood tree. For weeks, I had been fueled by anger. But looking at her picture, I felt that cold rage being replaced by a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoring what they'd broken. It was about justice, the kind you have to build yourself when the system fails. "Let's fix this the right way," I whispered to her. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Jack? It's Grinder," he said. His voice was different. It wasn't triumphant or excited. It was tight, urgent. "I finished my preliminary soil and foundation analysis from the perimeter. You're going to want to see this, and you're not going to like it." I met Grinder the next morning at a coffee shop, halfway between our houses. He spread a set of geological survey maps and some of his own hand-drawn diagrams across the table, his face grim. "It's worse than I thought, Jack," he said, tapping a thick blue line that ran right through the middle of the resort's proposed location. "That's a dormant utility easement. An old municipal water main from the 40s. It's not on any of the new plans because it was capped off 50 years ago. But the pipe is still down there. The county still owns the right-of-way. You can't build a permanent structure on top of it. Period." That was bad enough. But then he pointed to another section of his report, a series of numbers and graphs that meant nothing to me. "This is your real problem," he said. "They built the clubhouse foundation directly onto shallow bedrock. Didn't excavate deep enough. It looks fine now, but the first good frost heave we get this winter, and that whole concrete slab is going to crack like an eggshell. The building is fundamentally unsafe." The HOA, in their mad rush to build their monument to themselves, hadn't just stolen my land. They had built a death trap on it. This changed everything. My quiet, methodical legal strategy was no longer enough. This wasn't just about my rights anymore. It was about public safety. We had to move, and we had to move fast. That same afternoon, my lawyer, David Chen, filed a formal notice with the County Building Code Enforcement Office on behalf of Dogwood Properties LLC. The notice detailed the dormant easement and the dangerously shallow foundation, citing the relevant state building codes they were violating. It wasn't an accusation, it was a formal declaration of liability. If they ignored it, and something happened, the county would be on the hook. At the same time, David drafted a second letter. This one went to the HOA's insurance carrier, a big national firm. We included Grinder's entire geotechnical report. The letter politely informed them that their client was knowingly constructing an uninsured and uninsurable building on land they didn't legally own. We didn't demand anything, we just presented the facts. Insurance companies hate facts like that. The effect was immediate. 2 days later, a county inspector's car was parked at the construction site. The next day, work slowed to a crawl. By the end of the week, it had stopped altogether. Rumors started to fly through the neighborhood. I heard from a nervous neighbor that Karen Whitmore had called an emergency members-only meeting. He said she was trying to control the narrative, blaming the stoppage on supply chain issues, and malicious interference from a disgruntled neighbor. She was trying to paint me as the villain again. But the cracks were starting to show. Her foundation wasn't the only thing that was unstable. It was time to apply more pressure. My lawyer filed official trespass charges against every single member of the HOA board. The charges stemmed from them continuing to use their office building, the building my LLC now owned. It was a tactical move, designed to get them off balance, to make them realize I wasn't just an old man in a folding chair anymore. I was a landlord with a lease agreement they had violated. Then came the hammer blow. We filed a formal notice of intent with the county court. It declared our superior title through the mineral rights and announced our intention to reclaim the land due to malicious misappropriation of private property. This was no longer a dispute. It was a legal eviction notice for a multi-million-dollar resort. The HOA panicked. Their lawyers went into overdrive. But Karen, cornered and desperate, decided to fight dirty. She couldn't attack the LLC, so she came after me personally. A week after our court filing, 2 people from Adult Protective Services showed up at my door. A young woman with a kind face and a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They said they'd received an anonymous tip from a concerned neighbor. The tip claimed I was exhibiting signs of mental confusion and elderly paranoia, and that I might be a danger to myself. Karen was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. She wanted to strip away my credibility, my rights, and my dignity, all in one go. It was the cruelest thing she'd done yet. I answered their questions calmly, showed them my home, and explained the situation with the HOA as clearly as I could. They left looking more confused than concerned, but the investigation was now officially open. My own well-being was now a matter of public record. Just when I thought Karen couldn't get any more arrogant, she did. A glossy flyer appeared in my mailbox. It announced the grand opening gala and ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Harrison Woods Landing Summit Club. It was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. City officials were invited. The local press was invited. They were going to throw a party for a building that was illegal, unsafe, and built on stolen land. She was trying to create an undeniable fact on the ground, a public spectacle so grand that no one would dare challenge it. She was daring me to stop her. It was a reckless, desperate gamble, and it was exactly the opening I needed. I looked at the invitation, with its picture of the gleaming, unfinished resort. I saw Karen's name printed in elegant script at the bottom. The ceremony wasn't just a party, it was a stage. And I knew exactly how I was going to bring the whole production crashing down around her. On the night of the grand opening, I didn't wear a suit. I put on my old dress blues. The uniform still fit, the jacket crisp, the creases sharp. The medals on my chest felt heavy, each one a reminder of a promise kept. It had been years since I'd worn it, but tonight wasn't just about me. It was about standing for something. I wasn't just Jack Tiller, the grumpy old veteran. I was a representative of every promise broken, every right ignored. My lawyer, David Chen, picked me up. He was wearing a dark, conservative suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. 2 licensed surveyors he had hired for the evening followed in a separate car. My final call had been to a young reporter at the local paper, a woman who'd written a small piece about rising property taxes a few months back. I told her there was a bigger story at the Harrison Woods Landing party than just a ribbon cutting, and she'd been intrigued enough to agree to show up with a photographer. We arrived as the party was in full swing. String lights were draped over the unfinished patio. A small orchestra played elevator music near a bar serving champagne in plastic flutes. The cream of the neighborhood was there, dressed in their country club best. I saw the city councilman, the chief of police, all schmoozing and shaking hands. Karen Whitmore was the star of the show, gliding through the crowd in a sequined dress, her smile wider and brighter than I'd ever seen it. She hadn't seen us arrive. We stayed near the back, by one of the large plate glass windows that looked out over the dark woods, my woods. The crowd was a sea of unfamiliar faces, but I recognized a few neighbors. I saw them glance in my direction, then quickly turn away, their faces a mixture of guilt and discomfort. They had chosen their side. Finally, Karen tapped a champagne glass with a spoon and stepped up to a small podium set up near the empty swimming pool. The crowd quieted. A television camera from a local news station whirred to life. "Welcome, friends and neighbors," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous, unfurnished room. "Welcome to the future of Harrison Woods Landing. When I first envisioned this project, people said it couldn't be done. They said it was too ambitious." She paused for effect. "But we are a community that doesn't believe in limits. We believe in progress. And we will not let anyone or anything stand in our way." It was a direct shot at me, and several people glanced nervously in my direction. As she spoke, I saw a car pull up outside, its headlights cutting through the darkness. A man in a county-issued jacket got out. It was the building inspector, right on schedule. Karen was winding up for her big finish, her voice rising with manufactured passion. "And so, it is with immense pride that I declare the summit clue." She never finished the sentence. The county inspector walked straight up to the podium, a bright red notice in his hand. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He just handed her the paper and spoke in a low, firm voice that still managed to carry through the suddenly silent room. "Ma'am, this event is over. This facility is under an active code enforcement investigation. Your certificate of occupancy has been denied, and all access to this structure is prohibited until further notice." The silence was deafening. You could hear the ice clinking in people's glasses. Karen's face went from triumph to confusion to pure, unadulterated fury in the space of 3 seconds. "This is outrageous," she sputtered into the microphone. "This is harassment. This man," she pointed a shaking finger at me, "is behind this. He is a confused, vindictive old man who, actually, he's a property owner defending his rights." David Chen's voice cut through the tension like a razor. He stepped forward, calm and composed, and gestured to a large, white projection screen that had been set up for the HOA's promotional video. With a click of a button on his laptop, the screen came to life. It didn't show pictures of a happy community. It showed the original county plat map from 1958, a clear, undeniable document. Next to it, the HOA's fraudulent survey filing was displayed, the crude red lines looking like a child's crayon drawing in comparison. Then, David turned to the 2 surveyors he'd brought with him. On cue, they stepped forward with their equipment and a large, rolled-up map, confirming the original boundaries live in front of everyone. "The land this building is sitting on was never legally transferred," David said, his voice even. "It was stolen, using falsified documents." The mood in the room had shifted. The whispers were no longer about me. They were directed at Karen. Then came the final nail in her coffin. David pressed another button on his laptop. A recording began to play. It was Karen's voice, captured by Grinder's cousin during a private meeting with the contractors. "I don't care what his old papers say," her recorded voice snarled. "We have the county on our side. Just do whatever it takes to keep him off our land. Bulldoze whatever you have to." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Jim Miller, the man whose lawnmower I had fixed, suddenly shouted from the back of the room, "You tore up his wife's garden. You told us he was confused." Others joined in. The booing started as a low rumble and quickly grew into a roar. The city councilman and the police chief began backing away from the podium, their faces pale. The room had flipped. Karen stood there, frozen, her face a mask of disbelief, as her perfect evening, her perfect resort, her perfect little kingdom crumbled around her. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just stood there in my dress blues, a silent witness. The silence, after the shouting, was the most damning thing of all. Karen's lawyer rushed to her side and whispered something in her ear. Her face went white. She threw the microphone down and stormed off the stage, pushing through the crowd of her own angry neighbors. The party was officially over. The chaos of the grand opening party was just the beginning. The next morning, the fallout was everywhere. The local news ran a segment with the headline, "HOA Resort Project Halted Amidst Claims of Land Theft." The reporter I had tipped off wrote a scathing article detailing the forged survey, the unsafe construction, and the recording of Karen's voice. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors, their voices now filled with apology and shame. They'd been so blinded by the promise of a fancy pool that they'd ignored the rot in their own leadership. I didn't gloat. I just listened. The real battle, however, was happening behind the scenes. In lawyers' offices, the HOA board, now facing a mountain of legal trouble, was in full-blown panic. Their insurance company had sent them a formal letter denying all coverage for the resort, citing fraudulent misrepresentation in their policy application. The county had slapped a stop work order on the entire site, and whispers of a criminal investigation into the falsified documents were getting louder. Karen Whitmore's reign was over. A week after the party, a hastily written email went out to all the homeowners, announcing her immediate resignation from the board for personal reasons. She was trying to disappear before the building collapsed on her, both literally and figuratively. Their lawyer called my lawyer. They wanted to make a deal. They offered to drop all claims to the land, demolish the building at their own expense, and restore my property to its original condition. They even offered a cash settlement for my trouble. A few months ago, I would have jumped at that offer. It was everything I had originally wanted. But things had changed. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had intentionally tried to destroy my life and my wife's memory. Simply giving my land back wasn't justice. It was just a reset. David Chen conveyed my response. No. Instead, we made a counteroffer. My LLC, Dogwood Properties, now held all the cards. We had the superior land title, ownership of their office building, and proof of their malfeasance. We didn't want them to tear the resort down. We wanted them to finish it. We proposed that the HOA would be responsible for bringing the entire structure up to code, fixing the faulty foundation, and satisfying every single county requirement, all at their own expense. They would have to pay the contractors, the engineers, and any fines levied by the county. Once the building was complete and a certificate of occupancy was issued, the ownership of the building and the land it sat on would be formally and irrevocably transferred to my LLC. In short, they had to finish building their crown jewel just so they could hand me the keys. Their lawyer called it extortion. David called it specific performance. It was the only way to ensure the dangerous structure they'd created wouldn't just be left to rot. After 2 weeks of frantic, behind-the-scenes negotiations, they had no choice. They agreed. The alternative was a slew of individual lawsuits from angry homeowners, possible insurance fraud charges, and a legal battle against me they knew they couldn't win. The settlement was signed. Karen's dream resort was now my property, paid for in full by her own HOA. The implosion of the HOA board was swift and total. 2 other board members resigned the day the settlement was announced. The vice president, Ann Blakely, the quiet paralegal who had been the architect of the whole scheme, was named in a civil suit by the construction company for providing false title information. I heard she was facing an investigation by the State Bar Association. The community was in turmoil, but it was a cleansing fire. The neighbors, finally free from Karen's control, held a new election. They elected Jim Miller, the man who'd shouted in my defense at the party, as the new president. He was a decent man who seemed genuinely committed to fixing the mess. My first act as the new owner of the Summit Club was to change the name. I filed the paperwork to have it officially recognized as the Harrison Woods Community Center. My second act was to sign a 99-year lease agreement. I leased the entire facility, the pool, the clubhouse, the cabanas, to Dogwood Properties LLC for $1 a year. Then I had David Chen draw up a new set of rules. The members-only signs came down. The pool would be open to all residents of the neighborhood and their guests. The clubhouse could be booked for community events, free of charge. I waived all the fees. The only rules were simple ones: be respectful, clean up after yourself, and no bullies allowed. A few weeks later, the local paper ran a follow-up story. This time, the headline was different. It read, "Veteran wins back stolen land, and HOA's crown jewel." There was a picture of me, not in my uniform, but in my work shirt, standing in front of the community center. I wasn't smiling, but for the first time in a long time, I looked at peace. The battle was won. The land was mine again. But more than that, the quiet, the decency, the sense of order they had tried to steal, that was mine again too. And it was time to start rebuilding what really mattered. The first thing I did once the dust had settled wasn't about the resort. It was about the garden. The ground where they'd bulldozed Sarah's memorial tree was compacted and dead, littered with construction debris. I spent a week tilling the soil by hand, pulling out rocks and rusted nails, working compost into the lifeless clay until it felt rich and dark again. I bought a new dogwood, a young sapling no taller than my waist, and planted it in the exact same spot. It looked small and fragile against the backdrop of the massive community center, but it was a start. I built a simple wooden bench and placed it beneath the tree. It wasn't about erasing what had happened, but about planting something new in its place. The land remembers, and I wanted it to remember this too. A few weeks later, the new HOA board, led by Jim Miller, asked if they could meet with me. They didn't come to my house empty-handed. They brought a small, handsome bronze plaque. Jim, looking uncomfortable but determined, presented it to me. It read, "Property restored in honor of stewardship and neighborly integrity." They wanted to install it on the wall of the community center. I was hesitant at first. I hadn't done any of this for a plaque. But then I looked at the faces of the board members. These weren't bullies or schemers. They were just regular people. A teacher, an accountant, a retired firefighter trying to right a wrong. Accepting it was a way of closing the book on the old chapter and helping them start a new one. I agreed. Life began to settle into a new kind of normal. The sounds of construction were replaced by the sounds of children laughing and splashing in the community pool. Families had picnics on the grass where Karen Whitmore had planned to put exclusive cabanas. I never went inside the building itself. It held no interest for me. Its value was in the peace it brought back to the land. A strange and unexpected consequence of a fight I never wanted. One afternoon, while I was watering the new tree, I saw a moving van parked in front of Karen's old house. She was moving out. I watched from a distance as she directed the movers, her posture stiff, her face drawn and tight. No one came to say goodbye. She worked alone, a queen without a kingdom, packing up the remnants of a life built on a foundation just as faulty as the one her resort had. She never looked in my direction. When the truck finally pulled away, it was as if a storm cloud that had been hovering for months had finally drifted away, leaving clear skies behind. The final piece of the plan came a month later. The LLC had been structured to manage the property, and while I'd waived all the community fees, the building itself still generated a small amount of passive income from things like vending machine contracts and cell tower leases on the roof, things the old HOA had set up and forgotten about. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough. I had my lawyer establish a grant. We donated the first year's profits to a legal fund that provides free assistance to veterans fighting land and property rights cases against predatory developers and aggressive HOAs. It felt right. The fight had started because I was alone, and I wanted to make sure the next person in my shoes wouldn't have to be. I sit on my porch now most mornings with a cup of coffee, just like I used to. The gravel on my driveway still crunches the same way when I come home. From here, I can just see the edge of the community center through the trees. I can hear the distant echoes of life, of a community that is healing. The anger is gone. The grief for Sarah's tree has softened, replaced by the quiet hope I feel when I look at the new ones starting to bud. I didn't fight them because I hated them. I fought because I loved what they tried to take from me. Not just the land, but the peace that came with it. I see the neighborhood kids cutting through my yard, on their way to the pool, and I don't mind. They stick to the path. They're respectful. They know this is a place where boundaries matter. The land is green, it's peaceful, and it's mine again. And in the end, that's all I ever wanted.